Lamp from the Warlock's Tomb by John Bellairs, Chapter 9. When Miss Eels came to, she was sitting in the old mud-spattered Dodge, which was hurtling down a dark country road at great speed. To her astonishment, her foot was on the accelerator and her hands gripped the wheel tightly. She glanced quickly to her right and saw that Anthony was sitting beside her. He was shaking his head and glancing blearily around, like someone who had just awakened from a long sleep. "What? What?" mumbled Anthony thickly. "What's going on?" "Oh, Lord above, I wish I knew," exclaimed Miss Eels as she took her foot off the accelerator and began pumping the brake. The car began to slow down, and she finally brought it to a skidding stop at the side of the road. For the first time, Miss Eels noticed that the car's headlights were off, and with a frightened gasp, she reached out and switched them on. "Oh, my heavens!" muttered Miss Eels as she made the sign of the cross. "What if we had hit somebody while we were zooming along without lights like that? What happened to that well? And the corpses? Weren't we drowning just a few seconds ago? This is awful, just awful." As Anthony watched, Miss Eels opened the car door and got out. She began to pace back and forth on the road, and as she paced, she rubbed her face and shook her head. Finally, she came back to the car, got in, and slammed the door. Her fingers gripped the ignition key, and the motor roared to life. "Where are we?" asked Anthony. He still felt totally dazed and frightened. "Well, you may ask," said Miss Eels bitterly as the car began to move forward again. "For all I know, we may be in Nebraska or Canada. On the other hand, this road seems vaguely familiar, so I'll take a wild guess and say that we're probably on good old Three Rod Road heading back towards Stillwater. Also, I see that the gas tank is nearly full, so we couldn't have done too much gallivanting around tonight. I'm going straight back to Stillwater so we can find the road that goes south, and then we're going to drive till we reach Hoosac. How are you feeling?" Anthony rubbed his legs with his hands. "I feel kind of fuzzy in the head and numb all over, but I guess I'm okay," he said uncertainly. "What happened? Why did it look like we were going to drown? And are we awake or having a dream or what?" "I think we are more or less awake and in our right minds now," said Miss Eels grimly. "And as you may have noticed, our clothes are not even damp. That scene at the well was an illusion, something that was meant to scare us half to death. Mrs. G. Warmish, or whatever her name is, was trying to make us so scared that we'd never go back and pry into her affairs again. Of course, if we had gotten killed while we were hurtling along this dark road in a car without lights, I don't suppose Mrs. Warmish would have minded much. So why didn't she kill us outright?" Mrs. Eels sighed deeply and shrugged. "Ah, well," she said, "this is one of the questions we will have to toss into Emerson's lap when we see him again. In the meantime, if you know any nice long-distance driving songs, I wish you would sing them." Around midnight, Miss Eels' Dodge came chugging into Hoosac. The two travelers were dead tired, but their nerves were still a-tingle from the frightening thing that had happened to them out at Mr. Knightwood's old home. When they got to his house, Anthony climbed out, mumbled, "Thank you," to Miss Eels, and stumbled on up the walk to his front door. He climbed the stairs, pulled off his shoes, and threw himself into bed without even pulling the spread back. He slept soundly, but he had a disturbing dream about wandering around an enormous cemetery late at night. Somehow he found his way down a long stone ramp to a strange underground bathroom with hundreds of rooms in it. Anthony walked and walked past gloomy, ill-lit chambers where cracked marble tubs gaped and greenish copper faucets dripped endlessly. As he went, he began to hear footsteps behind him, and he ran faster and faster till he came to a flight of stone stairs that led down to two grim nail-studded doors. As Anthony watched in numb horror, the doors opened to reveal an empty satin-lined coffin in a room where rows of grandfather clocks stood along the walls. But instead of ordinary clock faces, these gloomy giants had grinning moon faces like the one Anthony had seen in the farmhouse. The footsteps got closer and closer, and unseen hands seized Anthony and thrust him into the coffin. The lid clicked shut over his face, and he screamed and pounded the coffin. And as he screamed and pounded, the coffin was lowered down, down, down. And then, blessedly, he awoke. The new year came with icy winds and snowstorms. Anthony followed his usual daily routine of school homework and household chores. In the evenings, when he was shelving and sorting books at the library, he often had conversations with Miss Eels. But they weren't very satisfying. For some reason, she did not want to talk about their trip to Stillwater. the haunted oil lamp, or the webby-faced ghost. She did say that she had called Emerson to tell him about the strange things that had happened to them up in Stillwater and the weird painting they had seen in the town hall, but she would not say what Emerson thought. As time passed, Anthony began to get worried, and before long he was positively alarmed. It was not like Miss Eels to clam up like this. He shared his secrets with her, and she was always open and honest with him. What was she scared of? Or was she under a spell of some sort? Anthony desperately wanted to know what she thought about the Nightwood case. But it was like trying to open a sardine can without the key. She just wouldn't talk. One freezing cold day toward the end of February, Anthony was cleaning the windows in the East Reading Room. It was Saturday, the only day when he worked mornings, and he was busy squirting Windex on grimy panes and swabbing them with an old rag. Outside, cars rolled past on icy streets, and little flakes of snow twirled down from the leaden clouds overhead. Suddenly, Anthony stopped what he was doing and stared. A black 1938 LaSalle had pulled up to the curb outside the library. As far as Anthony knew, only one person in the world drove a car like that, Emerson Eels. As Anthony watched, the little man jumped out of his car, shut the door, and came trotting jauntily up the walk. He wore a camel's hair coat with a fur collar and a green alpine hat, and under his arm he carried a large leather portfolio that was fastened by a wide leather strap. Anthony put down the Windex bottle and the rag, and he ran to the main foyer of the library, where the big paneled circulation desk stood. A set of wood-framed swinging doors opened into the room, and they swung open with a quack-quack sound. In walked Emerson. He was red-faced and out of breath, and he looked very upset. Emerson was normally the calm, cool, and collected type, and so naturally Anthony wondered what on earth was up. "Hello, Anthony! How are you?" gasped Emerson as he glanced distractedly around. "Where is my sister, eh?" Anthony discovered that Emerson's nittiness was catching. He began to stammer and act flustered himself. She's in her office, sir," he said, jabbing his finger toward the back of the building. Emerson pulled himself together and grinned wryly. "Anthony," he said solemnly, "I'm not sir to you, but your old friend Emerson, so I wish you'd address me as such. I didn't mean to alarm you by bursting in here this way, but I have something important to discuss with Myra, and with you. Can you tear yourself away from your work and come back to her office with me?" Anthony glanced around. Old Mr. Bemis was in the East Room reading National Geographic. In the West Reading Room, two 12-year-old boys were quietly playing a game of chess. He wouldn't be needed for the next 10 minutes or so. With Emerson close behind him, Anthony walked down a long, narrow corridor and banged with his fist on the paneled oak door. "Come in," called Miss Eels. Anthony opened the door and stepped inside to let Emerson in. Miss Eels was sitting at her desk, which was littered with white cards. A long wooden drawer lay near her elbow, and across it a long brass rod was propped. Miss Eels was trying to reorganize the card catalog for the library. She had been at this job for several years, but she had only made it as far as the letter C because she hated to work on the catalog and was always finding other things to do instead. When she looked up and saw Emerson, her jaw dropped. Then she grinned happily. "Em!" she exclaimed, jumping up. "This is wonderful! Why didn't you call and tell me you were coming? I would have—" Miss Eels' voice trailed away. She could see from the look on her brother's face that something was wrong, very wrong. "What's up?" she asked in a weak, throaty voice. "Well, you may ask," muttered Emerson as he dumped the heavy portfolio on the desk. "Anthony, come on in and shut the door." Emerson took off his coat and hat and hung them in the closet. Then he walked back to the desk and sat down in the leather-upholstered chair. Leaning forward, he undid the buckle on the strap that held the portfolio shut. He reached in and pulled out a set of watercolor drawings that were mounted on heavy cardboard mats. Anthony crowded in close for a look, and Miss Eels leaned forward in her chair. Emerson cleared his throat. "These," he said as he tapped the pile of drawings with his finger, "are pictures of the insides of various rooms in Willis Nightshade's summer home on the island out in the middle of Lake Stillwater. It seemed the house was not always the gloomy boarded-up dump that is there now. Nightwood actually threw parties, if you can believe it, and he invited poets, painters, musicians, and other cultural hotshots to his place. I found this out from an elderly librarian in the archives department of the University of Minnesota Library. I was up there doing some legal research, and I happened to mention Willis Knightwood to him, and then I really got an earful. Later, he took me right to the drawings, which probably haven't been looked at in years. Emerson reached into the middle of the pile and slid out a drawing that showed an elaborate furnished room full of overstuffed couches and chairs, with tall gilded backs and scrolled arms. In the middle of the room was a large circular couch with a high tufted back. It was the kind of couch that is sometimes seen in art museums. There were no windows in the room, but a marble fireplace was set in one wall, and above it were two niches that held urns. Another niche was set high on the left-hand wall, and it seemed to hold something, though it was hard to tell what it was. Emerson folded his hands in his lap and stared at the drawing for a long time, and then he glanced quickly up at Miss Eels. "Does this room remind you of anything?" he asked. Miss Eels looked blank. "No," she said. "Should it?" Emerson glowered at his sister, then he threw himself back in his chair and waved his arms scornfully. "Merciful sweet heavens!" he exclaimed. "Can't anybody ever see anything? This room is a lot like the room in the weird painting you saw in the Stillwater Town Hall. The painting you told me about, remember? Those niches over the fireplace could hold statues and not urns. The niche in the wall to the left could very well be a window, and the couch in the middle of the room could hide a round pedestal, the kind the lamp was sitting on. Is it clear to you now?" Miss Eels frowned and shook her head slowly. "I don't know, Em. I really don't know. There are a lot of could-bes and might-bes in what you're saying. What about the red statue, the one we saw in Mrs. Warmish's basement? Would there be room for it on the mantel of the fireplace?" "There would be room if somebody decided to make room for it," said Emerson through clenched teeth. He was getting more annoyed by the minute. "Mother of heaven, Myra!" he exclaimed, jabbing his finger at Miss Eels. "This is the room, the one in the painting. I'd bet any amount of money on it." Anthony stared at Emerson in amazement. He had never seen him this worked up before. Miss Eels was rubbing her lower lip doubtfully. You always did get crabby when you couldn't have your own way," she said, grinning at her brother. Then her manner changed. She folded her hands on the desk and leaned forward and looked serious. "But," she added, "you're a very clever man, and you may be on to something. All right, then, let's say that you're right. The room in the picture here could be fixed up to look like the room in the weird wall painting. So what?" "Yeah," added Anthony, as he leaned forward to tap the picture with his finger. "Does that mean old Mr. Hoosis did evil witchcraft ceremonies at his summer place? Is that what the statues and the magic lamp and the altar are for?" Emerson's face lit up. He was absolutely delighted. "Anthony!" he crowed, jumping up and slapping him on the back. "Very good, very good! You're a brilliant young man with a quick and discerning mind. The room was for ceremonies that old Willis was going to perform some day, but apparently he was missing one or two of the ingredients for his ghostly occult recipe. He had the lamp, he had the red statue, he had the two figures that had been installed as clock jacks in the town hall." "Jacks!" exclaimed Miss Eels, interrupting. "That's what the clue on the tomb door means. Animated figures that strike the hours are called jacks. I almost thought of that up there in Stillwater, but I just couldn't come up with the word." "You should take lessons to improve your vocabulary," said Emerson dryly. "If you're through interrupting, I'll go on. Old Knightwood needed something, I don't know what, in order to do his hocus-pocus. While he was trying to find the missing thing, he let the jacks stay in the clock tower, and he buried the red statue in his basement. Later, he may have tried to get the things he wanted by using another magic ceremony, and maybe that is why an evil spirit took possession of his body. At any rate, there is somebody up there in Stillwater now who is getting ready to do the magic right, and we can't let that happen, you see." "I don't mean to seem dense, Em," said Miss Eels, cutting it again. "But what is this lunatic planning to do?" Emerson gave his sister an exasperated look. "If you'll let me, I'll tell you. Remember that sentence in Anglo-Saxon that you found scrawled on a piece of paper in Knightwood's house? Well, it's from an ancient book of magic called the Alfricus Woldor. A few manuscripts of this book existed in England in the 9th century, and I have a copy. Somehow, Saxon wizards found out about Astaroth, a Phoenician goddess of the moon. They believed that Astaroth's spirit had been cast into the outer darkness thousands of years ago, but it was always waiting to return, and it could return if the proper ceremonies were acted out in the right time. The trouble was the Saxons didn't know how to bring her back, but they had seen visions and read signs in the heavens, so they knew what would happen if she did come back to Earth and take human form. What? Asked Anthony breathlessly. Emerson gave Anthony a quick, frightened glance. He jumped up and began to pace back and forth on the carpet. Then he stopped and stared piercingly at Anthony. My young friend, he began slowly, how would you like it if there was someone walking around among us who could kill you with a glance? I mean, really kill you, stone cold dead. And what if that same person could go anywhere just by thinking? What if that person knew the thoughts of everyone for miles around and invade your mind and fill it with horrid, unnameable thoughts and hideous blood-freezing fears? What if that person could become invisible and commit crimes and never get caught? Anthony turned pale. There couldn't be a person like that, could there? He asked in a trembling voice. Emerson bit his lip. Most people nowadays would say that a creature like that could not possibly exist. But most people would be wrong. Astaroth is just an ancient name for an evil spirit from the outer darkness, a spirit of unimaginable power and cruelty. That woman in the farmhouse up in Stillwater is trying to bring Astaroth back. Actually, she is trying to become Astaroth. When she made you think you were drowning in a well full of skeletons, she was using some of Astaroth's powers. But if Mrs. Warmish could play nasty tricks like that whenever she felt like it, she could make life a nightmare for anybody that she didn't like. Emerson paused and stared hard at a calendar on the wall. I won't know what's going to happen in Stillwater when the moon is full in March, he said it quietly, but I will be there, and I will try to stop it if I possibly can. And that is the end of chapter 9.